If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. People, what is your, no one will ever believe this, scary, paranormal, or haunting true story? I was camping in the Appalachian Mountains with 3 of my guy friends. We were all laughing and telling stories around the fire one night around midnight. The friend next to me grabbed my leg and pointed at the woods. We both saw a man's silhouette standing there. We called out to him, but he turned around and vanished from sight. We were 18, there was no cell service, and camp was all pitched up at midnight. It was too late to search for another spot where we might get away from whoever it was, and we were too scared to search for him. We decided to sleep through the night there with 2 man-watch teams. There were no signs of him for the rest of the night. We got out of the woods, all right? 2 days later, 2 hikers were stabbed and killed by a mentally disturbed man, who'd encountered them on a trail near where we were camping. Every now and then, I wonder how close we came to having our cards punched that night by what could have been a knife-wielding murderer. When I was 16, I woke up to one of those very vivid real-life dreams. Like a dream where you wake up in your room and don't realize you're still dreaming. I sat upright in bed, looked sideways to my door, and saw a figure standing in my doorway. The figure said, "Your dad will die when you're 22. Then I actually woke up, lying in bed too nervous to turn around and look at the door. The next morning, at breakfast, I told my family, including my dad, about the dream. Everyone was uneasy, and then my dad said, "Don't worry about it. Now that you've told me, there's no way it'll happen." He died tragically and suddenly when I was 22. My so swears she saw an alien when she was younger. It was in her room in the middle of the night, and she looked worried when it was seen by her. She had woken up because her mouth was so dry. She got so scared that she hid under her sheets and apparently fell asleep very fast. She says it wasn't a dream, and she could still feel her hardened muscles from the fear when she woke up. Having majored in psychology, I didn't believe her at first since our only link with anything in the world is perception, which is very dependent on our not trustworthy brains. She was pretty new to the internet when I met her, and I cross-checked things she said without letting her see them before. She described the alien, which was spot on the grays, before seeing the picture. I know she could have seen one in so many media, but she never watched TV movies, etc. But the thing that got me was when I read other alien contact testimonies, they all had a very dry mouth. Insanely dry, as they describe it. And with all the Bob Lazar stories and discovered proofs, so said the alien was about 4 feet tall before we watched the documentary where Bob mentions the crafts were designed for 4 feet humanoids. I can actually say, even as an academic, that I strongly believe in aliens. Back in 2012 to 2013, I lived in my aunt's basement. I used to have this horrible feeling while living there. The staircase is blocked by a wall, and every night when going to bed, I would close my eyes and picture this cow/horse skeleton Grim Reaper thing with a black cloak and chains hanging off its body, peering around the corner at me. Its hand was a long, bony human hand, and the head is a horse's skull with cow horns. Peering around the corner of the wall, its hand on the wall, watching me. I never told anyone about this. Fast forward a couple of years, and my sister is now living in the same basement. She one day randomly told me about this creature she would picture peering around the wall. And guess what? Same ducking description. So, I draw the thing. And I show her the picture, and she says she imagined the exact thing. So, I never saw this thing in person. But I would picture it in my mind while trying to sleep. She experienced the same thing. To this day, I have no idea how this could have happened, and when I search for creatures that look like this, I can't find anything. I have no idea if it's a real demon thing that haunts the house or what. But neither of us mentioned it to the other before she mentioned this thing to me, and I confirmed that I also saw the same thing. The owls. When my grandpa passed away in November of 2008, I was at my dad's house. The front yard is almost enclosed by pine trees. I kept hearing weird noises, so I decided to go outside and see what it was. We were shown a light on the trees and were greeted by many pairs of eyes. There had to be at least 20 owls just hanging out in the trees. My grandpa had an interesting way with birds, and we had a very close bond. That was the only time the owls had ever been to our house. My mastiff passed away last year. I was home alone, brushing my teeth, when I heard the familiar sound. I thought I was going crazy, but no. There they were, owls in the trees. A completely different time of year, 12 years later. The owls keep watch. When I was 8 years old and my sister was 7, we both had the same dream and ended up sleepwalking together in the night out into the middle of the road. Let me give you some backstory. Earlier that day, we had new neighbors move into the house behind us. They had 2 daughters around our age that we quickly made friends with. Well, That night, my sister and I both dreamed of running in a field full of sunflowers, picking them for our new friends. I felt so happy and carefree in the dream, and I could see my little sister running alongside me, also picking sunflowers. Well, when we woke up, my mom and our neighbors were there, telling us that we had both been sleepwalking around outside together, holding hands, and about to walk into the middle of the street when my neighbors, not the ones we had just met, who had just gotten home, spotted us. The wife ran to grab us, while the husband ran inside his house to get his gun before going into our house to check on my mom. Because we had left the front door wide open, they thought there might have been a break-in. My mom is hard of hearing. She is completely deaf in one ear and only has about 15% of her hearing in her other ear. She wears a hearing aid but takes it off at night to sleep, which is why she never heard us go out the front door. Anyway, after we realized what had happened, we talked about everything and literally recalled all of the same details and remembered seeing each other in our dreams. It's now been 20 years, and we still remember everything the same and stick by our memories of that night. I'm just grateful to our neighbors, because who knows what would have happened if they hadn't noticed us. I was fishing with a rod and reel on the bank of the mighty Mississippi River about an hour south of Memphis when I saw something creeping up the river a few feet from the bank. At first, it was swirls, but that piqued my interest. Then, I could see limbs moving just an inch or so beneath the water. I was on a high bank, looking down on this creature. The limbs didn't make sense to me because they were way too far apart to be anything I'd ever actually seen there. I was standing there watching it swim up the river when I realized somebody was screaming something in the distance. I ignored the screams while I walked along the bank in an effort to follow this massive beast. Just below the water, I saw arms and legs working in unison to propel it against the current of the mighty river. From time to time, it broke the surface of the water just a bit, enough for me to see the long hairs come together. Below the water, the hairs floated out from the limbs. It was 8 to 10 feet long. I stood there in amazement as the creature slowly drifted down into the murky water. Then I actually listened to the words that the man was screaming. "Did you see it?" Over and over again. The man had a heavy foreign accent, but I then realized he had seen the beast down the river and was trying to catch up with it. "Yes, I saw it." I screamed back to him. When he got close, I showed him where I first noticed it and also where it went back down. He saw the same thing I saw, but it was on the other side of the harbor when he saw it, miles away. We stood there talking about this massive beast that, as far as we knew, no one else had seen. I felt camaraderie with this stranger like I had never felt before or since. We talked for about 30 minutes as we both scanned the waves for another glimpse of this thing that I can only describe as a Chewbacca from the Star Wars movies. I never saw the face. Just the back of the head, legs, arms, and torso. One thing that really bothered me was that it never surfaced for a breath. When I was 15, about 10 years ago, my best friend invited me, my brother, and our other friend to go camping with him and his family. My buddy's family drove us up to a dusty little parking lot of a campground in the eastern Sierras called Mill Pond. On the second night of our 3-night stay, we somehow convinced my friend's parents to let us hike up into the hills and set up a tent so we could stay the night on our own. We spent most of the afternoon lugging gear up the hill, 2 or 3 miles away from the campground proper. When we finally finished setting up camp, we decided to go on a twilight hike in the hills. A few hours later, just past sunset, we returned. Exhausted from the day, we called it an early night and went to bed. Hours later, we were suddenly awakened by bright lights shining through the thin material of our tent. They were coming from the direction of the hills. My friend guessed they were headlights, but they seemed far away, and none of us heard a running engine or any other sounds. Just an eerie, bright light in the distance. After about 3 minutes, the lights went off. Confused and a little afraid, we decided to try to go back to sleep. I lie down, roll onto my side, and make eye contact with my friend who is facing me. I'll never forget the look of absolute fear in his eyes. I asked him what was going on, and all he could do was point at the tent above my head. I follow his finger and see something poking the side of our tent, depressing the fabric so that the point of whatever is poking in is just inches from my face. I screamed in fear and scrambled away from the protrusion. My brother and other friend turned towards me, saw the protrusion, and yelled as well. Strangely, it stayed there while we screamed and only slowly retracted after a good 10 to 15 seconds. We spent the next 10 minutes huddled together, yelling threats at whatever was out there. Our shouts and screams were met by nothing but silence. After our voices grew hoarse, my friends convinced me to open the tent flap and look outside. Trembling with fear, I unzipped it and poked my head outside. I saw nothing. No vehicle, no tracks, no footsteps. There is absolutely no evidence of anything approaching our tent. We spent the rest of the night arguing about whether we should hike back down or not. In the end, none of us felt brave enough to make the trek back to camp. We stayed awake until morning, packed up the tent, and walked back down the hill. When my friend's mom asked how our night was, we just grumbled and said something about the cold. I'm not sure if we were afraid of getting in trouble or just wanted to pretend that it never happened. Either way, we've never talked about it to this day. I used to babysit this little red-headed girl from the age of 6 months to almost 2 years. Her parents lived in my town, in a nice house, and were very religious. I babysat this girl every day for a long time. I knew their house very well. I always had this odd feeling that I was being watched at their house. I spent most of my time in the living room. The setup was this: the girl's room was connected to the living room, as was the dining room. Parallel to the living room was a door that housed a guest room, which connected the hallway and bathroom. You could see the door or room of the guest room while you were in the living room. Anyway, so I would always have a feeling of being watched from that room while I was in the living room. Like an eerie sixth sense. So, one day, after playing with every toy possible, I put the baby down for a nap. I begin cleaning up the toys when, all of a sudden, I feel like I'm being stared at. I shake it off and finish cleaning, then sit down on the couch and relax. Not long after, a toy goes off. Now, this was a toy that was right in front of me that does not have motion sense activation or anything. It was this little pushcart thing that lit up and played music. It went off right in front of me after having been off or quiet for over an hour. It scared the shit out of me. Now this is where it gets ducking weird. I asked it to stop, and it stopped. Immediately. Mid-jingle. I then, to see if I was ducking crazy or something, who knows, asked it to turn back on, and it did. I flipped my SHT and freaked out. It didn't do it again, even though I asked. It went silent for the rest of the day. I immediately called my mother and grandmother and tried to explain what happened and how panicked I was, but to no avail. I even went so far as to call the father and say I was really freaked out and wanted to go home, which is really unlike me because I love creepy shit, but I just had this really bad, creepy, panicked feeling. He eventually came home, and I told him what happened, and he laughed it off and said he doubted that his house was haunted, etc. My grandma or mom also told me I was imagining it, but I swear to God, this SHT happened right before my eyes. I was home alone playing Skyrim, I think, one evening when the refrigerator kicked on. Our ice maker usually makes quite a noise, so I wasn't skeptical or put on edge at all. I noticed that while it was making noises and doing what fridges do, it happened to make some kind of rhythm. This caught my ear, and without thinking, I vocalized that rhythm, waited a few seconds, and then made another one up, because, why not? A second or two after I finished, the refrigerator replied with the same rhythm I had just made. Thinking this was some kind of coincidence, I vocalized yet another rhythm, this time a bit longer and a little more complex. 2 seconds later, the same exact rhythm is repeated back to me. Naturally, I freak out, and just to make sure, I make up one more short rhythm, and sure enough, it's repeated right back to me. I get a case of the heebies and slowly creep around the corner to see if someone is there. I always make sure to fortify my house and double check the windows and doors when I'm alone, for safety, and of course the kitchen is empty. Thoroughly freaked out, I grab the sleeping dog and retreat to the safety of my room for the remainder of the night. Living in the woods can make some things 10 times creepier than they should be. I have had a lot of unexplainable experiences in my dad's house, but when I finally told my family, I found out that none of them had experienced anything similar. It's starting to freak me out. I've always had a bad feeling in his house, and I get that same feeling in other places as well, like my old school's gym, one of my mom's old houses, the living room and basement specifically, etc. Everyone looks at me like I'm insane for saying that, but I've never been so honest about something in my life. It sucks. When I was a teenager, I really started experiencing things more. It was always when I was home alone. There was a time when a cup was sitting behind a chair in the living room. I left the room, and when I came back, it was dead center in the middle of the rug. I have also heard footsteps, dishes clanking in the sink, and a deer head falling off the wall. The deer head could have been from a bad hanging job, but I can't explain the other stuff. I've also seen a shadow moving in the basement, but never an actual ghost or apparition, or whatever it's called. My ex-boyfriend also described seeing a tall man with a hat out of the corner of his eye. That house is built next to a pioneer cemetery. My dad, who doesn't believe me, has the hobby of collecting antique clocks. He had a clock from my deceased grandpa that wasn't working because he needed to wind it up. He went to bed with it not working, and the next morning the clock was wound and ticking. Anyway, it's just annoying that nobody believes me. My childhood home was built in the 1970s, so it's not super old, and we're only the second or third family to live there. I've been very in touch with the paranormal since I was a child. Or at least, very much a believer. My grandfather was the same way, claiming to have seen multiple spirits in his lifetime. My grandparents live in Britain, and I grew up in the States. When they used to visit, they would stay up to 2 months over the summer, and they would stay in my bedroom. I would stay in a room with my sister. When my grandparents visited, they were here for so long that we referred to my room as their room. When I was around 13, my grandfather got sick in the UK. He went into surgery, and everyone, including the doctors, expected him to pull through. My parents, my sister, and I were in the States at the time, and we were all anxiously waiting to hear how the surgery went. I deal with anxiety differently. Instead of wanting to be with my family while we waited for news, I went to my room and wrote in my journal. My bedroom door was wide open as I sat and wrote. From the corner of my eye, I saw a figure walk into my room. It was tall, like my grandfather, swift, and dark. It looked like a black figure with something trailing behind it. I could sort of feel her presence walk into my room, like I wasn't alone. I looked up, and it was gone. Minutes later, we get a call that my grandfather has passed. It was a shock since everyone expected him to pull through, and it actually ended up being a vital mistake by the surgeon, who went to trial. Months later, I told my family, and they said that I was just stressed and seeing things. Yes, I was anxious, but we all fully expected him to pull through. My room after that never felt the same. While I was not scared at all about that presence, years later, one summer when I was home from college, I felt something tug on my sheets. My grandfather was a really good, loving man. This spirit, or whatever it was, did not feel like him. It felt horrifying. Eventually, I also heard tapping on the window next to my bed. I never looked because I was too scared, but it was happening every night at around the same time. It got to the point that my mom had Orkin come and make sure there were no bugs or animals in the walls or on the roof near or above my room. There wasn't anything. Not knowing how to make me feel better, my mom gave me my grandfather's brothers, who he was very close with, and he died almost exactly a month after my grandfather, rosary. I'm not religious at all, but my grandfather and his brother were. I hung it up next to my bed, and sure enough, the tugging on my sheets and tapping on the window stopped that night. Also worth noting, these things only ever happened in my room, nowhere else in the house. When I tell people these stories, they don't believe me, think I'm imagining things, or process grief the wrong way. But I know my grandfather would have believed me. So growing up, I was in and out of foster care until I was adopted around 5 years old. My first permanent week with a new family was very stressful. I remember feeling very stressed and anxious, and I couldn't sleep. When I did, I would have a reoccurring nightmare. One night I had a reoccurring nightmare, and I woke up crying. I sat up in my bed and stared into the hallway, and I saw people walking up and down it. This one lady had the lower body of a human but the upper body of a shark. She came into my room and sat on my bed. She looked me in the eyes and told me everything would be okay and to just go to sleep. After that, every night when I cried myself to sleep or I'd wake up from the nightmare, she was there in my room, watching me and telling me everything is going to be okay. When I asked my mom about the shark lady, she told me it was just a dream, but I remember her sitting on my bed and telling me I was going to be okay. I remember that was the only time, as a child, I felt safe in the house. I vividly remember the people walking up and down the hallways. One tall, lanky man and one old lady with curly hair would always stand in my doorway, waiting for the shark lady to leave my room. I even remember what they were wearing. To this day, I can still hear her voice. Part of me wants to believe I made her up to help me cope with the new, but something in my gut tells me that's not true, and she is 100% real. Living on the lay of Manhattan in the 1990s, I went to a friend's house on East 10th Street, between 1st and 2nd. It was one bedroom, and they slept in the living room and used the bedroom as a second bedroom. I stayed over at their apartment one night and woke up at, 2 a.m. I went out to the kitchen, which was between the two rooms. I saw an apparition sitting on the edge of their bed. They were sound asleep. It was the color of a light glow stick, and it looked like a man in his late 20s or 30s. I could see the outline of his t-shirt and jeans, but the face was blank. It had no face, or no features, which I could see. I was so startled by this that I let out a little noise out of my mouth and quickly stifled it so it wouldn't see me. Too late. It turned its head and looked right at me. It scared me so bad. I quickly went into the bathroom and sat with my back to the door. I don't know what that would do, but I didn't want to wake my friends. I don't know why. I must have stayed in the bathroom for an hour and a half. My friends didn't wake up. I got up and opened the door to the bathroom to find the thing had moved closer to me. Maybe 3 feet away. It was just standing there, looking at me. I was scared to death. I closed the door and stayed in the bathroom for the rest of the night. The next morning, I told my friends about it, and they said that I described the guy as his father. He had died around age 32 and wore blue jeans and white t-shirts all the time. This thing was sitting on their bed for hours, watching over them. They will later find out that they were both using heroin at that time in their lives. I prayed to never be receptive to this again. So this happened like 4 to 5 years ago, and I can't stop thinking about it. Every time I tell this story, either no one believes me or they pass it off as me having sleep paralysis. But here it goes. I was in my room, trying to sleep, and my house started to shake. I was the only one home, with my mother at her boyfriend's house and my brother at my stepfather's house. But my house was vibrating, and I heard this deep tone. The tone got louder and louder and louder, to the point that it sounded like there were giant house-sized speakers on each side of my house and one above it. The best way I can describe the sound is like an all-encompassing foghorn from a lighthouse. I was wide awake, and I ran downstairs and outside, where I could still hear the sound, but there was absolutely nothing outside. My heart was beating out of my chest, and I could feel my pulse behind my eyes. This is such a vivid memory, and I know I didn't dream it. I'm not a religious person, I've never seen anything supernatural before. I do believe in aliens, other life outside of this planet, and even some of the myths that people seem to believe in, such as Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, and even mermaids. But what I saw the other day was real, and nobody believes me, although if someone else told me this, I probably wouldn't either. It was Friday, March 18, 2016. I ordered some hiking boots, and they just got here that day. The weather was nice, surprisingly, since it rains so much in Washington, so I decided to go hiking. I went to Capitol State Forest, near Olympia. There was no one there, no traffic, or anything. It seemed kind of boring. I was just walking down this trail next to the road. But then a car comes driving by, it was comfortable, and the top was down. I was crouched on the trail, hiding so he wouldn't see me. The person stopped the car for some reason. He was a white man with short black hair and sunglasses. All of a sudden, he changed. It was fast, like a blink of the eye, and then he was a red man, bald with small black horns on his head. He was wearing a black jacket. I only saw it from the waist up because it was in the vehicle. I was staring at this thing for a full minute, trying to put it together. I thought this couldn't be real, thinking of other explanations, but there weren't any. What I saw was real. After this minute, it just drove off. I was scared shitless and just stood there for a couple minutes after that. I eventually went to the road where the car was and examined the area, but there was nothing. At first, I thought I saw Satan, but I highly doubt that would be him. Then I thought it could have been a demon. But what makes me most sincere would be a shapeshifter, an alien, or a shapeshifting alien. People think I'm crazy, but I know what I saw. I wish I would have recorded it, but my phone was the last thing I was thinking about when I saw this creature. I have so many theories of what it could be. What if it is an alien from Mars? We are trying to turn Mars into Earth. So if there is life there already, it would make sense for them to come to our planet and observe us. Or it could have been an alien from another planet or just a shapeshifter. I'm not 100% sure what it was, but I'm 100% sure this thing was not human. When I was 14, I had a strange encounter that still puzzles me to this day. On the weekends, I'd sometimes go to my mother's place. My parents are divorced. The house she lived in was converted into several small apartments. It was a creepy old farmhouse. The house was at least 150, or maybe 200, years old. My mom told me off and on of strange sounds she'd been hearing and seeing things in the corner of her eyes, feeling watched. This one particular evening, when I spent the night, I brought my N64 because my mom would go to bed early and I'd still be up for a few more hours. I still remember to this day what game I was playing, WWF No Mercy. I was sitting Indian style on the floor, playing story mode. I just finished a mission in the game and set down the controller to the left of me, behind me. Directly behind me was a recliner. I'll never forget what I saw next. I went to grab the controller and saw what appeared to be a hoof, like a horse, next to the controller on the floor. Insects and blood were coming out of the sliver that separated the hoof. I thought to myself, how strange. I slowly glanced up, and this demonic figure was staring back at me. It leaned down towards me, its face getting down in my face, and it grinned the most evil smile. The eyes were black, the face red, and there was one winged creature. Blood was dripping from its teeth. It was so surreal that I immediately went into a panic attack and blacked out. I learned later that it was the fight or flight response. Several seconds later, I came to, laying on the floor, and could barely move. The demonic figure in the chair laughed at me. It was as if my fear and energy had been sucked dry from me. I lost all strength. I did all I could to crawl to my mom's room and wake her up. After I woke her up, we talked, and she believed me. She told me she'd also seen the same thing earlier that week but didn't want to scare me. I don't know what to make of it, and I still think of it to this day. I have no doubt demons and angels are real, and believe me, the last thing you ever want to encounter is a demon smiling in your face. I don't care if you believe me or not, but when two people see the same thing on two separate occasions, either we're both crazy or something is or was wrong with that old farmhouse. My mom has thankfully moved since, and we haven't encountered that thing again. So this happened to me multiple times in a span of 2 years, all around the same hour. I would say the first time I heard it was 2 years ago. I was watching TV, and right behind me in the kitchen, I heard 3 loud knocks. I turned around towards the kitchen and thought it was nothing, but 30 seconds later, the same exact knocks came from the same place. It was very late and there was no one awake in my house. A distinct, pretty loud 3-knock pattern. The second time it happened was around 10 months later. I was laying down in my bed watching YouTube when, again, 3 knocks paused and 3 knocks again came from my brother's room behind mine. My brother wasn't in my house and no one else was awake. I remembered the first time it happened and got really scared. I checked the time, and it was around the same time it happened the first time. Then, around 6 to 7 months later, I was trying to fall asleep when, all of a sudden, I heard 3 knocks again from my brother's room behind me. I instantly knew what it was and built the courage to get out of my sheets, reach for my phone, and hopefully record the second set of knocks. As I turned my phone on to go to the camera, the second knock happened, and I couldn't record it. I have shared this story with multiple friends, but no one believes me and says that I am hallucinating or that it was my dog. My house is clearly haunted, and no one ever believes me until they spend the night. I've had a lot of experience. One night, me and a friend were going to walk outside, and we heard a quiet, demonic laugh from a woman that slowly started getting louder and louder. I thought maybe my phone was playing a random video, but it was off, and when I asked my friend if it was their phone, they told me they didn't even have their phone near them. Objects move right before your eyes. Another friend, who was a non-believer, had his drink on the table slide all the way to the edge and had to catch it before it fell. My daughter and I saw a shoebox move across the floor. I've woken up to my feet being cold, only to see my blankets levitating well above the bed. Lights flicker, my TV turns on, and it makes strange noises. I get sleep paralysis and sleepwalk a lot. My daughter and others have seen an apparition of a little girl with long black hair and a long white dress. She taunts them by poking her head around the corner a few times before running to the next room. And the by far worst thing that's ever happened is that I blacked out and had no memory for about 45 minutes, but came back with a huge lump right above my eyebrow and ended up with a concussion and a broken eyebrow bone. What's super weird about it is that I had a handprint bruise on one of my arms as well. Mind you, I was home alone. So, this happened to me when I was 10, but I was so shocked that I remember it vividly. My parents go to the farmer's market weekly. This time, they brought me along. So this farmer's market was held on a big parking lot, and on the ground, here and there were some sorts of metal gratings, and you could see the sewers. I don't know if you can picture it, but I could try finding one. Anyway, I was always scared of walking on them as a kid because I thought I would fall in. But that day, the market was full, there was not a lot of space to go around, and I had to walk over one of them. As I did, I looked down, and there was somebody down there looking back. He was small, he had pointy ears, but it's his eyes that I can't forget. They were golden and so shiny. I looked at him, and he looked at me for what seemed to be an eternity. I was so shocked that I just kept on walking. When I went back to the car, I told my parents. I told everyone, but nobody would believe me. To this day, nobody does. It has even become a running joke among my friends. So I stopped talking about it altogether. This happened a while ago, when I was about 16 or 17. I had been living with my eldest sister as a sort of live-in babysitter for my 3 nephews at the time, and my room was in the unfinished basement. Sort of just a big area rug on the floor, a dresser, bed, and TV. The usual. I was down there reading or something one day when I heard my sister's voice, clear as day, call down to me, "Hey, come upstairs." Having no reason to think anything of it, I roll off my bed and make my way towards the stairs. I was about halfway up when a feeling of absolute terror hit me. My hair stands on end, and my skin crawls. It's the middle of the day, with the sun shining brightly through the many windows of the entryway that sits atop the open stairs. I try and shake it off, wondering what the heck. I get to the top, and the feeling only gets worse. I call out my sister's name, realizing something quickly. It's silent in the house. Anybody with any number of young kids, especially 3 boys all under 10, knows that doesn't happen. There is a little carpeted set of steps that lead to the always open French doors of the main house. I don't see anyone inside, and as soon as I take a step towards them, my heart leaps into my throat. I have never been afraid of anything like I was in that moment. On a whim, I walked away to check the garage attached to her car. I had just opened the door when I heard her voice say again, "Come in here." I glanced into the garage and saw that her car wasn't in there. I didn't waste any time. I raced down the basement steps to grab my car keys and noped out of there. It's been 10 years, and I still have no idea what happened. I told my friends and family and got a few, "You just scared yourself, silly girl, and you must have imagined it." But I don't think so. I'd been living out there for months by that time, been alone dozens of times, and nothing like that had ever happened before. My dad told me a story recently. This is from back when he was a kid in Mexico. When my dad was a kid, he and my grandpa went to my grandpa's land to prepare the soil for planting crops. Bored, my dad wandered off to a nearby stream where he saw a bunch of human-like dolls playing around in the water. He said they looked like adults, only smaller. With proportions like dolls, not sure what exactly that means. They splashed around in the water, and at times it looked like they were even walking on it. They signaled for him to come and play with them, and my dad ran over excitedly. He said he played with them for a while when my grandpa noticed that he had wandered off and went to find him. When my grandpa found my dad seemingly playing alone by the stream, getting all wet, he got super mad and dragged him away. Apparently, my grandpa and grandma were never able to point them out whenever my dad would point them out. My dad still recalls looking back while my grandpa yanked him away and seeing the duendes waving goodbye at him. After that, my dad started seeing the duendes around the house. They'd pop out from behind walls during dinner, and my dad would try to feed them scraps of food, much to my grandparents' annoyance. Eventually, they got worried and took him to a local curandera. She did a little ritual and told him to keep a cigarette behind his ear for a week. And then the duendes were gone. He never saw them again. My dad swears it's all true, even though no one believes him, and he's embarrassed about even telling the story. The only reason he told me it was because my mom teased him about it the other day, and I forced it out of him. Me and my friends were having a slumber party. Let's call my friends Owen, Ryan, and Kylie. My name is Mavis. It was at Ryan's house. It was 10 o'clock at night. We were all bored, so Owen asked Ryan if he had an Ouija board. Ryan said yes. We were all 16, so being young, naive teens who were bored as fricks, we all agreed to do it. We researched the rules and played. We took it very seriously. I asked the first question. I asked as a joke, "When will I die?" It spelled tomorrow. Owen was a prankster who kept moving the glass piece as a joke. It spelled the word tomorrow. I accused Owen of moving it. He swore up, down, left, and right that it wasn't him. We got scared, so we said goodbye. The next day, I had a lot of near-death experiences. I had my driver's license and a car, so I was driving to school when a deer came out of nowhere. I missed it but swerved into a ditch. I have a chandelier in my house. It fell and nearly killed me. I nearly got hit by a car. The next day, everything was back to normal. I don't think it's a coincidence. Whenever I tell anyone about it, no one believes me. The Ouija board's prediction was almost correct. I think the demon tried to kill me. So basically, I was with a group of friends walking from one condom to another. There was a forest between these condominiums, with a fence dividing it from the sidewalk. I was behind the group with one of my friends. We were walking through a slightly dark part of the street, and Sonny, both of us saw some white things in one of the trees. It looked like slime, and it was moving in a really weird way. It had no legs, no face, and it was a really powerful white. There's no chance it was a light or something else. I called for the other guys, and as I shouted, it started climbing really fast in a really bizarre way, as if I scared it. I turned on the lights on the phone to see if I could find it, but honestly, I was scared too, and my heart started beating fast, so I just started running away with my friend. It was so good to have him there, because we talked later and both of us saw the same thing and even complimented each other as we talked, so I was sure I was not hallucinating. Of course, none of our friends who were in front of us believed in what we said. Some of them got intrigued, but I wouldn't blame them for not believing it, as I wouldn't blame you. It was really strange. It was like that venom slime but white. It's my only encounter with something that I just can't explain. It really looked like it was not from Earth. I have had multiple experiences with an, to me, unexplainable thing. It's been a few years since it happened the last time, and I stumbled upon it again after I heard my mother talk about some Muslim superstitions. We are Muslims. The first time I saw that thing was in primary school when I was 6 years old. We had PE class and were told to go to the sports hall in a double row. The person in front of me was someone I didn't really like, nor was the kid next to me. On our way to the sports hall, I saw a black arm with a white hand slapping the neck of the girl in front of me, and she started crying. I got accused of slapping her neck. I immediately told the teacher that it was a black arm, but of course no one believed me, and sure, it could have just been my imagination, but the kid who was next to me back then to this day tells me he saw that arm too. It has been 6 years since that happened. This is one of the many experiences I had with that black arm. Growing up in a Mexican household, my mom and I never had the best relationship. I was 9 when it happened. I didn't talk much as a child. I didn't think I had anything interesting to say or that anyone cared about what I thought. This is something that terrified me, and no one believed me. We used to live in a 2-room trailer. My family was a family of 6, including me, my 3 siblings, and 2 parents. My sister and I had a small room to ourselves, my brothers would take the other room, and our parents would sleep in the living room, dining room, or kitchen. Note that I am the oldest of the 4, and usually that means I have more responsibilities than my siblings, also taking into account that I am female. My siblings and I were walking home from school one Friday, and I remember it being a hot day. When we got there, we did the usual routine, turn on the TV to watch PBS Kids, wait for mom to cook dinner or make sandwiches, take a nap, etc. I was watching TV when my mom suddenly got between the TV and me and started screaming at me. I don't remember what she was yelling at me about. I just remember she was infuriated with me. My siblings went to their rooms while my mom grabbed me by the shoulders and just yelled. I cried, and I was getting angry too. I remember screaming at her through my tears when, out of nowhere, she slapped me. We were both taken aback by what just happened. She started to cry too, and I could tell she was stressed out. I just couldn't understand why or what was causing it. I ran to my room crying and laid down on my bed, drowning out the screams in my pillow. My sister left the room to watch TV. I fell asleep. Well, I cried myself to sleep. It was a good sleep, too. One moment it's the afternoon, hell broke loose, and the next I open my eyes and it's pitch black. But the thing is, I didn't just wake up on my own. I felt like something pulled the blanket that was on me. I shrugged it off and uncovered myself, thinking maybe I was just having another one of those dreams where you feel like you're falling and you jolt awake, but it was also very hot. When I uncovered myself from the blanket, the room felt so fresh. I saw my sister in her bed on the other side of the room, and I tried going back to sleep. Not a minute goes by. And something took hold of my foot and pulled me down like it was trying to drag me under the bed. I immediately sit up, and I see a black hand firmly gripping my foot. I can still feel it sometimes, and that image is forever burned into my head. I panicked, and I yanked my foot away from its grip. I sit down on my bed, breathing heavily, trying to process what just happened. Was it real? Did it actually happen? Yes, I could still feel its grip around my foot. I tried leaning over the side of the bed. I wanted to run, but I didn't want it to grab me as soon as I stepped on the floor. I prepared myself, and I bolted out of the room and into my mom's bed. I felt really bad and guilty about leaving my sister behind. But I was a child. I was scared. I woke up my mom and told her what happened. She replied, "Okay, go back to sleep." I did as she said. Tried to. I slept at the end of the bed, by her feet. And I tried my hardest to go back to sleep. Eventually, sleep did take over, but it was restless. The next morning, my mom asked me why I was sleeping in her bed. I told her what happened again, and she did not believe me. She said I was just imagining things, and it was my guilty conscience because of the way I behaved the day before. I learned to keep quiet about it. Since that day, I have never slept with my feet uncovered. I do not care if I'm roasting like a chicken under those blankets. I am getting crispy, but I will not be taken. I had also acquired a deep fear of the dark since then. I will absolutely not sleep without some kind of light. I learned it the hard way, too. A couple years ago, I accidentally went to sleep in the dark, and for the first time ever, I experienced sleep paralysis. What I can say with certainty is that I have never felt alone. It's like it keeps following me, or it wants something. This thing has watched me grow, it has watched me suffer, cry, laugh, and sleep. When I was little, we took a trip to Florida. My grandparents had a condo we stayed at. We were all at the beach one day when a big black lab came running up to us and started playing. There's no one in sight. The few people that we saw said the dog wasn't theirs. My parents checked his tag, there was a number, so they went back to the condo to try calling his owners, thinking maybe he'd gotten out. This whole scenario goes on for about 2 hours or so. We didn't just want to abandon him at the beach. So I played with the dog the whole time. His tag said his name was Shadow, and I have to say I made a fast friend that day. After about an hour, and many more calls, after that, we really have to get back home, and we wonder what to do with the dog. My grandparents went back to the condo, and my parents packed up to go back as well, and the dog seemed to take a hint and bound off along the beach, happy as can be. He didn't seem scared or anything, so we hoped he'd just find his way back home to his owners. I was reminiscing recently and brought up Shadow to my parents, who just looked at me with the most confused faces I've ever seen. They had absolutely no clue what I was talking about. They both claimed without a doubt that it never happened. I've never felt so genuinely batshit crazy in my entire life. One time, when I was maybe 10, I woke up in the morning before everyone else in my family and went out into the living room. From the living room, I could see my younger brother, my only sibling, sitting at the dining room table with his back to me, and it looked like he was drawing or coloring on a piece of paper. I asked him something to the effect of "Good morning, what are you doing?" And he just kept drawing with his back to me. For a split second, I walked past a part of the wall, more like a column, that was in between the dining room area and kitchen. In the short moment that I passed the column and looked at him again from the other side, he was gone. The paper and crayons were still there. I paused for a moment, and said his name out loud questioningly, then got spooked and ran to my parents' bedroom. They were both completely asleep, and my brother was fast asleep next to them. He'd had a nightmare and slept with them that night, which would happen every so often. The way the house was set up, it wouldn't really have been feasible for him to slip past me and then quickly pretend to be asleep in my parents' room. My parents have never really believed me or thought it was part of a dream, and my brother swears to this day he wasn't in the dining room that morning. I recently moved out of my childhood home into an apartment with my boyfriend. I haven't moved too far away, just on the other side of town, so I still go and visit my parents regularly, when we're not in lockdown. I've always known that my parents' house is haunted. I could feel it. As a kid, I used to walk around the house at night talking to no one, which terrified my mom, but I have no memory of this. I also had awful night terrors and sleep paralysis, which, of course, could be totally unrelated, but I would always see an old man in the corner of my room just looking at me. When I was 11, we got our first dog. She was a miniature schnauzer, and she took on the role of my bodyguard almost instantly. She would sleep on my bed most nights, and I'd often wake up to her snarling, teeth bared, at that same corner where I'd see the man, which always led me to believe that he was really there. My parents never believed the things I would tell them I'd experienced in the house. Anyway, fast forward to a few months ago, and I get a frantic call from my mom saying that she was so sorry that she never believed me and that now even my dad, the biggest skeptic I know, believes there's something in the house. My mom explained that a few weeks after I moved, she and my dad took my old bedroom, as it was quieter and a bit bigger. Since moving into that room, she has started to suffer from sleep paralysis, and I saw an old man in the same corner as me. The thing that scared me the most was when she explained that lots of the glass in the house keeps smashing. One Saturday, my dad was cleaning a windowsill, and one of the window segments completely shattered out of nowhere, and he was showered with glass shards. Luckily, he only got a few minor cuts, but he was really shaken. My mom was cooking one night, and a Pyrex jug shattered in her hand. A few glasses have come flying out of the cupboards when opened and smashing on the floor. The list goes on. My mom said that both she and my dad have felt really angry for no reason. They fight more than they used to, and my mom feels like something is watching them. She said the only time the atmosphere lifts is when I come to visit. Maybe something in that house is mad that I left and feels attached to or possessive over me? After all, it will have watched me grow up. I feel kind of anxious to visit because I don't want whatever this is to attach itself to me more than it already has. I never even thought about elves before I had my first experience with them. I used to spend the night at a friend's quite often. Her parents became, almost, more my friends than my friend herself. They always told me about their paranormal occurrences, and they were always so fascinating that I wish I had met them sooner. This particular night, my friend wasn't home, and neither was her brother, just her parents and me. While we were having this amazing dinner made by her mom, a Polish woman raised in Mexico and trained in world cuisine, she was telling me how the elves on the bench had been especially naughty lately. I was really confused because I wasn't sure if I had heard her correctly. By the elves on the bench, you mean the dolls sitting on the tiny bench outside the bathroom? She confirmed I had heard correctly. She then told me that because of the time of year and certain cosmic or environmental events happening, I really can't remember what they were, she had been busy with the elves more often than usual. I asked her to describe how they'd been keeping her so busy. The girl is always the hardest to find. Sometimes I won't see her for days and find her in places where I know I have looked, she told me. The other two are just loud, and they like to get dirty. I have to constantly wipe the mud off their shoes. I did it again this morning. To say the least, I was skeptical, and I don't know why, because I always trusted everything they said, even the more fantastical stories. All I could reply with was, "Ha, how interesting." We finished dinner, cleaned up, and went upstairs to watch a movie, as we usually do. We watched a comedy, and I completely forgot about the elves. After the movie, we went to bed. I slept in my friend's room, and her parents went straight to theirs. We closed our doors, and I fell asleep almost immediately. It must have been between 2 and 4 a.m. when I woke up feeling kind of uneasy. My friend's room was right across the bench where the elves sat, but I wasn't thinking about them. I started listening for something that might explain why I felt uneasy, but all I could hear was the loud snoring coming from the parents' room. I decided to try and go back to sleep, and the reason I was feeling uncomfortable was because of all the spicy food before going to bed. As soon as I closed my eyes, I heard tiny little laughs and tiny little steps. I could feel my breath freezing in my chest, my stomach dropping, and my eyes springing wide open. I could still hear their snoring, loud and uninterrupted. Mechanical. And the little laughs and little steps ceased the same way children stop when you catch them in the middle of doing something they shouldn't be doing. They knew I was aware of them. It felt like forever before they started scrambling around, and little by little, the laughs resumed, but not as loud as before. And I could see them. Not fully since the door was closed, but I saw the shadows from the slit under the door. I was terrified but almost equally excited. I forced myself to sleep, and I managed to, but it wasn't a restful sleep. When I woke up again in the morning, I could still hear my friend's parents snoring a little more quietly. I must have debated for about a half hour if I should open the door or wait for them to wake up and be the first ones out of the rooms, but I couldn't wait for too long before Mother Nature made her call loud and clear. I took a deep breath and opened the door, and there they were, all three of them. I was sitting there, and I would have thought I just had a wildly vivid dream until I noticed the mud on their feet. A while ago, my boyfriend, a non-believer, and I were sitting in our living room watching a YouTube video about the real conjuring house. In the video, the new homeowners were talking about shadow people, and so I said to my boyfriend, "I think I have had a few experiences with shadow people," and literally, just as I said it, a weird black/white flash went through our apartment. I saw something black move very quickly past my peripheral, and my boyfriend described it as like a camera flash going off in our apartment. We were both like, "What the heck was that?" He is trying to explain it away as some sort of light from outside, but we have lived here for years and never saw anything like that. This is not the first weird thing that has happened in this apartment. Our ceiling fan used to turn on by itself all the time, and it used to scare me so bad that I asked for it to please stop, and it's never happened again since asking it to stop. I always feel like there is someone in the bathroom with me while I am showering, to the point that I have spoken out loud to my boyfriend, thinking he is in there, only to move the shower curtain and see that he's not. There have been times I could have sworn that I heard someone opening the bathroom door while I'm in the shower, but sure enough, every time I look, no one is there. One morning I woke up to my boyfriend whispering to me, "It's time to get up," and I opened my eyes with a big smile on my face only to see that he wasn't even home. The man who used to live here's name was Tom. Tom died in our kitchen, and we moved into the apartment 3 months later. Tom was actually a family friend of my boyfriend's family. Tom knew my boyfriend when he, my boyfriend, was a kid. It is actually a fluke that we ended up moving into this exact apartment. When we first moved in, we had no idea that Tom used to live here, and died here, until we had already signed the lease and met our neighbor, who happens to be Tom's son. We often hear weird banging noises coming from the kitchen, and we both say out loud, somewhat jokingly, "Oh, you stop it, Tom," and then the banging stops. My boyfriend claims to not believe in any of this stuff, but I sometimes do think we have a spirit visitor. The incidents I am describing are very few and far between. They are not enough to convince me that we have a consistent haunting. I also have no proof that if there is a spirit, it is actually Tom. I was 12 or 13. It was a Saturday morning and not a school day, so I slept in until 9:30 or 10 a.m. I woke up and had breakfast with my mom and dad. They got into a huge fight. Then they went into their bedroom on the other side of the house to argue. I watched some cartoons, and then around 11 a.m. I decided to go brush my teeth. Now, when you walk into my bathroom, the sink is about 2 feet in, right in front of the doorway. So I enter and start brushing. There's a big mirror, but I saw nothing behind me in it. Then I finish brushing my teeth, and I get this sudden sinking feeling that somebody is standing behind me, but I knew my parents were still arguing in their room and still saw nothing in the mirror. I remember the fear I felt turning around. Then, there it was, standing right outside the doorway, in broad daylight, about 2 to 3 feet in front of me. It was tall. It would have had to have crouched to enter the bathroom. It was completely dark and shadowy and looked 100% like that picture, except it had these horrifying, glowing red eyes. It stood there for a second, staring at me. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. I still have nightmares to this day of something bad happening and trying to scream, but no sound coming out. Then it reached out its hand towards me, fingers pointing outward. Long, skinny, dark fingers. It reminds me of a Dementor from Harry Potter. Then, with its outstretched hand, it took a step towards me. Frozen in fear, I remember thinking, this is it, I think my life is over. Then, after taking one step towards me with its outstretched hand, it just vanished. Gone. I immediately ran and told my parents. They didn't believe me and probably still don't to this day. My mom shrugged it off, and my dad just laughed at me, which didn't surprise me. He'd be the dad in the horror movie Nothing Is Wrong with This House. As pots and pans float midair around him in the kitchen. So as long as I lived in that house, I closed the door every time I entered that bathroom, and from then on, I slept with the light on for years. I was around 7 years old, and my mom had driven us an hour away from home to visit our aunt and uncle, who lived in a town called Sandbach in England. It was me, my sister, who was 9, and my mom. I vividly remember this day because my dad had died a few months ago, and it was the first proper trip out of the house since his death. Anyway, we get to the house, and our aunt is fussing about it because she never had kids of her own and wasn't overly fond of kids, but my uncle at the time, John, was kind of fun. Or so I thought anyway. He was a strange man who suffered very badly from OCD. His disorder would eventually be what caused my aunt to divorce him. John took me and my sister Laura out to the garden to play. Looking back, I think this was to prevent us from making a mess inside the house. He started a game with us. He said it was called Mr. Wolf, and the game went like this. You had to creep to the end of the garden and peek behind the shed where you would find Mr. Wolf. I remember him smiling, and it seemed like a really fun idea. I remember being excited, and their garden was really nice and perfect looking. I remember creeping up the garden, giggling, and peeking around the shed, and this is burned into my brain like a hot iron brand. Behind the shed stood an absolutely massive wolf, but it wasn't really a wolf. It was really tall, like a huge adult man, covered in browny gray fur. It had a creepy, long snout and horrible yellow eyes, and it was staring straight down at me. It even had a horrible matted tail. I remember being completely frozen in fear. I just stood staring at it. It had its back pressed up against the back of the shed. I have no idea where my sister was, but I'm sure she was in the garden too. We had to take it in turns to peek at Mr. Wolf, I think. I remember as I stood staring at it, it raised its hand, put a finger to its snout, and shushed me. I distinctly remember it had fingers, not paws, but was covered in fur. I remember its fur looking matted, and when I stood looking at it, it started to smile, and it had horrible long teeth. I remember running as fast as I could to back up the garden, but my uncle wasn't in the garden anymore. I went into the house and told my mom about the wolf. I was really upset and begged her to come and see it. She went and looked, but there was nothing there. My uncle was in the garden and told me it was only a game and that there wasn't really a wolf. He then changed his story and said Mr. Wolf must have gone back to the forest. I know children have wild imaginations, but I know what I saw that day because it utterly froze me in terror. I was rooted to the spot. I asked my sister if she had seen the wolf when she went behind the shed, and she said she did. She said it was terrifying and that she never wanted to come back here again. This is a memory that has always really bothered me because that day is so vivid in my mind. I remember after the wolf, Laura and I went to a local park to play across the road because we didn't want to be near the house. I don't know what happened that day, but my mom has always said it was my imagination, and my sister remembers it too. My aunt barely acknowledged the whole thing as she does, but to this day I get this sick, unsettling feeling whenever I recall the memory. The wolf's face and form are still crystal clear in my head. This happened when I was approximately 14. I live in Ukraine, a Slavic country in Eastern Europe. My grandma has a house in a little, mostly abandoned village with only dirt roads and 3 parallel streets. There were like 4 families that were living there beside us and a few single old people. Other people either died or left the village for the city. My grandma got that house from her parents, and we used to go there each summer for a month or 2. One of the few remaining families had a cow, and we used to buy milk from them. For me to get the milk, I had to take my bicycle and a little plastic basket that was strapped to the back of my bicycle, with money and a 3-liter jar in it. So I was coming back from those people with freshly gathered milk. I was leading my bike beside me because balancing with a 3-liter jar was tricky, and I just wasn't in the mood for that. At the moment I saw it, there were approximately 50 meters to my house and 200 meters to the end of the street, where the dirt road had a sharp left turn. When I accidentally looked at the end of the road, I saw a gray horizontal ellipse hovering somewhere 50 centimeters above ground. I didn't see the whole thing. But it was pretty huge, maybe 2.5 meters high and somewhat near 5 meters long. It had 3 lights in circular formation at what I considered to be the center of a side that was facing me, and the lights were blinking. The ship was hovering sideways, slowly hiding behind the corner of the street. As I was standing there, something inside of me was telling me that coming closer was a bad idea, so I stood there motionless. Maybe that was fear, maybe common sense. Fast forward 7 years, I'm 21 now, and I clearly remember that day as if it were yesterday. I could never have imagined that I would ever see an UFO so close to me. I told that story to my mom because she believes in the paranormal a little bit, but I don't think she believed me about that case. The most interesting part of this story is that an old woman who lived in the corner house, the same house behind which I saw UFOs, vanished the same year I saw the ship. No hints of struggle were found in her house. No corpses were found during all these years. No one knows what happened to her. So I was very young when this happened, maybe 3 or 4 years old, so I'm guessing around 1997-98. I know your mind can implant false memories, so I don't know if it actually happened or not, but I remember it very vividly. We were living in Germany, and I shared a room with my brother, who is 4 years older than I am. The head of my bed was right below the only window in the room. One night, he jumped out of bed and ran across the room to where I was to look out the window. This is where things seem weird because it was like he knew something was out there and he needed to see it, but there was no way he could have seen or heard anything down there at all. I got up to see what the fuss was about, and down on the street below, a man stood completely still facing the road, which stretched away from where we were. He was tall and broad, he wore a suit, a long brown overcoat, and a fedora-type hat, which made him look like someone from the 1950s. But he had no head, his hat just seemed to float. I could see the pavement behind him where his head should have been. He turned and walked away from us down the street for about 20 yards, stopped, and turned to face the road again. 20 seconds later, he walks another 20 yards, and once again, he stops and turns to the road. He did this 4 or 5 times before he disappeared into the darkness. He never turned in our direction or in any other direction apart from straight down the street into the road. No cars or other people came down the street when he was on it, and the atmosphere around him seemed ghostly and still. The fact that my brother seemed to know he was there weirds me out as much as the fact that he seemed to have no head. I don't remember feeling scared or intimidated. I felt more excited to see this headless man. It's one of my earliest memories and has stuck with me ever since. I've never spoken to my brother about this, nor have I told anyone. Around 10 years ago, when I was 9, I went on a residential school trip to a farm in Gloucestershire, England, as part of a program to get city kids into the country to experience a finer life, I guess. The program was started by children's author Michael Muppergo. I only remember that because I was a massive bookworm and read most of his books. Anyway, the girls' and boys' dorms were upstairs in this big farmhouse. There was a big circular corridor with doors to the girls' dorm, for ages 7 to 9, the room I and the girls my class were staying in, then the 7 to 9 boys' dorm, the teacher's dorm, the 10 to 12 boys, and finally the 10 to 12 girls, which my dorm had to share a bathroom with. Anyway, it was the 4th or 5th night in the dorm room. I had chosen to share a bed with my friend, we'll call her Sabrina, across the room from my actual bed, as I was bored, and she said it was okay. The beds were all against the 4 walls of the room, with the big window next to me and the door to the far left of me. Sabrina's bed was the only one on this side, a bunk, and another friend was on top. She's important later, so we'll call her Carmen. So everyone was asleep, and I couldn't sleep for the life of me. So I was just staring in no particular direction when what I can only describe as the glowing white outline silhouette, almost see-through, of a Victorian-looking maid came walking along the path between the 2 beds with a ghostly tray in her hands and what looked like a tea set on it. She walked all the way to the foot of the bed I was on, looking out the window, never looking at me. I froze for a second, not scared but more astounded. I have seen ghosts all my life now, I think back, but this was the most prominent, except the little girl in my old house, but that's another story. I tried to wake Sabrina, but when we both looked, the maid was gone. The next day, I told everyone, including my best friend, who was the only one who believed me. She no longer does, And we don't speak anymore, we haven't properly since we were like 11. I told everyone and scared one of the other girls, but she got over it. My favorite teacher tried to say it was her checking up on us, but I said, how could she get in without opening the door, and why would she have a tea set? And she went quiet. The next night, I had my first panic attack that I remember, I think due to being away from home for so long without my dad or nan. My mother had passed a year previous, and I had a very sheltered life, only staying with family members every now and then, and the head teacher who had come with us had to sit with me, holding my hand until I fell asleep. It's not weird, he was gay and kind of took responsibility for me as I was a troubled kid. I still see him around. Cool dude.